As you're seated, take your Bible and go with me to John's Gospel. We're going to pick up where we left off last week. Let's go to John chapter 7. Of a long section, but it all flows together. It is one unit. It all fits together. We have what seems to be a period of at least several months between the end of chapter 6 and the beginning of chapter 7. And chapter 7 begins what is from beginning of 7 till about chapter 10, verse 22, a couple months span in the life of Jesus, beginning at the Feast of the Booths, or the Feast of the Tabernacles, beginning in chapter 7, leading to the Feast of Dedication in the middle of chapter 10. Jesus moves from Galilee at the beginning of chapter 7 into Jerusalem for this Feast of Booths, this Feast of Tabernacle, which is a time in which every year the people of God would be reminded of the way that God had provided for them when He brought them up out of Exodus and into the wilderness. They lived in tents, they lived in booths in the wilderness, and they celebrate the way that God provided for them. And specifically, they celebrate the way that God had provided water for them in the wilderness, that God provided light to guide them, and God provided water for them to drink to keep them alive. And so chapter 7 happens at this context, the Feast of the Tabernacles, the Feast of the Booths there in Jerusalem. And I want you to see as we read this common thread of unbelief that runs through the entirety of the chapter. Remember, John tells us why he writes every passage in his gospel. He says in the end of the book that there were a lot of things that he could have written, a lot of things Jesus did that are not written. But he says that these things are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and by believing you may have life in his name. That he writes this, that we would see Jesus, that we would come to him in faith, and that we would have life. So let's read, beginning in chapter 7, verse 1, through the end of the chapter. After this, Jesus went about in Galilee. He would not go about in Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. Now the Jews' feast of booths was at hand, and so his brothers said to him, "Leave here and go to Judea, that your disciples also may see the works you are doing. For no one works in secret if he seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world." For not even his brothers believed in him. And Jesus said to them, "My time has not yet come, but your time is always here. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify about it that its works are evil. You go up to the feast. I am not going up to this feast, for my time has not yet fully come." After saying this, he remained in Galilee. But after his brothers had gone up to the feast, then he also went up, not publicly, but in private. The Jews were looking for him at the feast and saying, "Where is he?" And there was much muttering about him among the people, while some said, "He is a good man." Others said, "No, he is leading the people astray." Yet, for fear of the Jews, no one spoke openly of him. About the middle of the feast, Jesus went up into the temple and began teaching. And the Jews therefore marveled, saying, "How is it that this man has learning when he has never studied?" So Jesus answered them, "My teaching is not mine, but his who sent me. If anyone's will is to do God's will, he will know whether the teaching is from God or whether I am speaking on my own authority. The one who speaks on his own authority seeks his own glory. But the one who seeks the glory of him who sent him is true, and in him there is no falsehood. Has not Moses given you the law? Yet none of you keeps the law. Why do you seek to kill me?" The crowd answered, "You have a demon. Who is seeking to kill you?" And Jesus answered them, "I did one work, and you all marvel at it. Moses gave you circumcision, and not that it is from Moses, but from the fathers. And you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. If on the Sabbath a man receives circumcision so that the law of Moses may not be broken, are you angry with me because on the Sabbath I made a man's whole body well? Do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment." Some of the people of Jerusalem therefore said, "Is not this the man whom they seek to kill? And here he is, speaking openly, and they say nothing to him. Can it be that the authorities really know that this is the Christ? But we know where this man comes from. And when the Christ appears, no one will know where he comes from. So Jesus proclaimed, as he taught in the temple, "You know me, and you know where I have come from, but I have not come of my own accord. He who sent me is true, and him you do not know. I know him, for I have come from him, and he sent me." And so they were seeking to arrest him, but no one laid a hand on him because his hour had not yet come. Yet many of the people believed in him. They said, "When the Christ appears, will he do more signs than this man has done?" The Pharisees heard the crowd muttering these things about him, and the chief priests and Pharisees sent officers to arrest him. And Jesus said, "I will be with you a little longer, and then I am going to him who sent me. You will seek me, and you will not find me, and where I am, you cannot come." The Jews said to one another, "Where does this man intend to go that we will not find him? Does he intend to go to the dispersion among the Greeks and teach the Greeks? What does he mean by saying, 'You will seek me and will not find me, and where I am, you cannot come'?" On the last day of the feast, the great day, Jesus stood up and cried out, "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water." Now this he said about the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive. For as yet the Spirit had not been given, because Jesus was not yet glorified. When they heard these words, some of the people said, "This really is the prophet." Others said, "This is the Christ." But some said, "Is the Christ to come from Galilee? Has not the scripture said that the Christ comes from the offspring of David and comes from Bethlehem, the village where David was?" And so there was division among the people over him. Some of them wanted to arrest him, but no one laid hands on him. The officers then came to the chief priests and Pharisees, who said to them, "Why did you not bring him?" And the officers answered, "No one ever spoke like this man." The Pharisees answered them, "Have you also been deceived? Have any of the authorities or the Pharisees believed in him? But this crowd that does not know the law is accursed." Nicodemus, who had gone to him before and who was one of them, said to them, "Does our law judge a man without first giving him a hearing and learning what he does?" And they replied, "Are you from Galilee too? Search and see that no prophet arises from Galilee." We are really bad at diagnosing. We are really bad at seeing symptoms, reading and understanding those symptoms, and diagnosing what is at the base of those symptoms. That's why all of you, when you're sick, you go to ChatGPT's older brother who kind of went to medical school, you go to WebMD. And what do? When you feel sick, you go to WebMD and you put in your symptoms. You have a headache, and you have body aches, and you have a fever, and you have the chills. You put in all these symptoms that you feel, and then you sort of get spit out a list of these are the possible diagnoses. These are the possible things that you can have. And if you're using WebMD, when you go to WebMD, you are assuming the worst. So you put in all those symptoms. You could have a sinus infection, you could have the flu, or you could have Ebola. And so you read it and you just assume, I bet I have Ebola. I bet that's what I have. We're really bad at looking at symptoms and finding right diagnosis. We often misunderstand what it is that we have. We assume, often physically, we assume the worst about our symptoms. There is an irony, I think, that when it comes to our spiritual life, to our own souls, often the assumption is the opposite. We assume the best of our own souls. But we're just as bad at diagnosing our own spiritual lives, at seeing the symptoms that are before us and figuring out what it is that is at the root, what is ultimately the foundational cause, what is behind all of these symptoms that we feel. I want you to think about this image of sickness and symptoms, of illness and the symptoms that flow out of it. Because I want you to see what John has done for us here in this large section in John chapter 7. He gives us this to us as a unit. He shows us unbelief from nearly every angle possible in John chapter 7. He shows us all of these different reactions and different rejections of Jesus in John chapter 7. And at the base, behind all of them, is the same root cause, is the same sickness. That even though that it looks different in his brothers, and it looks different in some of the crowd, and it looks different with the chief priests and the Pharisees, the root cause of all of this rejection of Jesus in John chapter 7 is unbelief. John is teaching us something here about the nature of unbelief, about the symptoms and the root causes of it. And you say, well, why do we need to know about unbelief? I thought John wants us to believe. Why would John want to talk to us about unbelief? Well, part of what it means to see Jesus and to believe and to have life is to understand what it means to see Jesus and not believe. That John teaches us about the nature of unbelief and what that unbelief does to us and what it looks like in our life so that we would see it, that we would recognize it, and that we would see Jesus and come to him in faith, that we would see, believe, and be saved. Well, what is it that John here is teaching us then about unbelief? What is it that he hopes us to see as he sticks all of these accounts together and shows us all of these various rejections of Jesus? If we were to stick to the sort of sickness image, here's the banner that I would put over the text. The world's deepest sickness is unbelief. That the root cause of all of these different types and varieties of rejections of Jesus in chapter 7. And they are all very different, but they're all rejections of Jesus. But the root cause behind all of those rejections of Jesus is the same. It is unbelief. Now, this is counterintuitive to the way we naturally think. That often we think of unbelief as coming on the back end of lots of reasons or lots of other causes, that people have reasoned arguments or they have evidence or they have experience that leads them to, on the basis of this experience or argumentation or evidence, leads them to then reject Jesus, leads them to unbelief. But what Jesus consistently says throughout the Gospels, and especially in John's Gospel, is the exact opposite. That Jesus has been telling the crowds, you don't believe me, that's why you don't listen to me. You don't believe me, that's why you don't hear me. You don't believe me, that's why you don't understand me, not the other way around. That there is unbelief that is at the root cause that leads to this rejection of Jesus. This unbelief is fueled by this self-destructive pride. If you think back to a passage we looked at several weeks ago, back in John chapter 5, if you remember, Jesus is talking with the Jews there, and he tells them, you think you know God, but you don't know God. You've never known God. You think you know the Scriptures, but you have missed it. The Scriptures point to me. You don't know God. You don't listen to God. You don't hear God. And he says to them, you only seek your glory. You can't understand me because I seek the glory of the Father. And then he says to them in John chapter 5, verse 43, how can you believe when you receive glory from one another and do not seek the glory that comes from the only God? He says to them, you can't believe because you only care about yourselves. You only care about your own glory. You only care about the glory that you receive from others. That it is unbelief that leads to the rejection of Jesus, not the other way around. They're willing to see his signs and to receive his benefits and to listen to some of his teaching, but they don't truly hear him. They don't come to him in faith. They hear him without listening because they don't believe him. This is still the current state of the world. The world's greatest plague was then and is still now unbelief. Now, people have a lot of, just like in John 7, a lot of diverse reasons for why they reject Jesus. They say things like, well, I don't trust Jesus because I don't trust the Bible. But what I think Jesus says is, no, you don't trust the Bible because you don't trust me. That the base is unbelief. That root behind all of these rejections of Jesus is unbelief. It is all built on our response to the person and the work of Jesus himself. So why do you need to know about unbelief? Well, that you would recognize it. That you would see it in your own life. That you would know what it looks like then to come to Jesus in faith. That you would know what it looks like to hear and to listen and to obey the word of Jesus. So what I want to do is there are a lot of things that we could say about John chapter 7. If you're hoping for me to explain every single detail in here, we have communion today. There's no way I'm going to get to that. I want to focus on the way that John shows us this image of unbelief, this all of these diverse rejections of Jesus that all find themselves with the same root cause, this unbelief of Jesus. So if that is the deepest sickness of the world, what are the symptoms of unbelief? How do we see this unbelief that has taken root in their heart? How does it appear outwardly? And we see it appear outwardly in a variety of ways in John chapter 7. It does not look the same for everybody. So what does unbelief look like? What are the symptoms of unbelief? Number one, it's misguided expectations. Beginning of chapter 7, we get Jesus' interaction with his brothers. And it's a really curious thing. The feast, we're told that Jesus is staying in Galilee and is not going to Judea because the Jews are seeking to kill him. This is a turning point in the gospel where now there is more open hostility to Jesus. And John tells us the Feast of the Booths was at hand, the festival of the tabernacle was at hand. And his brothers come to him and say, why are you wasting all your miracles up here in the wilderness, up here in Galilee? Go to the big city. You need to go to Jerusalem. You need to go to the feast. No one does these great things in secret. If you really want people to know you and to follow you and to believe you and to see that you are who you supposedly say you are, if you really want to grow a following, Jesus, you've got to go to Jerusalem and you've got to do these things openly. Now, we might expect John then to say that they make this request of Jesus because they believe that Jesus is the Christ. But what does John say? They make this request. Jesus, go down openly to Jerusalem. Do all these things that the whole world may see. John says, in fact, in verse 5, for not even his brothers believed in him. Well, what in the world? Why is it that they make this request of them? But as John says, then they make this request for not even his brothers believed in him. Now, some would say that they are maybe mocking their brother. They don't really believe that Jesus has done any of these things, and they're mocking him and saying, oh yeah, it's easy to fool these sort of backwater people in Galilee, but if you go to Jerusalem, everybody will see what you are. I don't think that's what's happening here, mainly because of the context and because of Jesus' response for them. I think that what is happening is his brothers don't really understand who Jesus is. They understand some degree that he's able to do some miraculous signs. They recognize that here they have in their brother essentially a cash cow. They have in their brother one who can bring glory to himself and to them, that they would like to go to Jerusalem. Who wouldn't want to be at the festival of the booths, the feast of the tabernacle, with the man who was doing all the miracles and be able to say, that's my brother? They want Jesus to go and to grow a following, and Jesus recognizes these misguided expectations that he has of them. Jesus doesn't rebuke them and doesn't say, quit mocking me, but notice what Jesus says to them. He says, I'm not going to go to the feast right now, for my hour has not yet come. My time has not yet come. In John's gospel, when Jesus speaks of his time, it always refers to his death, to his arrest and his crucifixion and his death. And he says, there is a day in which I'm going to march into Jerusalem openly and publicly as king. It comes at the triumphal procession at the end of John's gospel. Jesus says, that day, not today. I'm not going to march in publicly the way that you want me to. But he says, notice the way that he distances himself from his brothers. He says, the world hates me because I am the light that has come into the world. And I declare that the world's works are evil, that I expose the works of the world. He says, the world hates me, but what? It does not hate you. Jesus is saying to his brothers, you're not a part of the light. The world hates me because I am the light of the world, but the world has no reason to hate you because you are just like them. You care about your own glory. They have these misguided expectations of what they expect of Jesus, and Jesus says, I will refuse to listen to your own seeking for pride and the expectations that you have placed on me. Now, curiously enough, Jesus does go to Jerusalem. Jesus here, he doesn't lie to his brothers, but he's saying to them, I refuse to go to Jerusalem in the way that you want me to. I'm not going up publicly to do all these signs and wonders to grow a great following. Jesus waits till his brothers go, and then Jesus goes, not publicly, but he goes secretly. He goes privately, and he waits several days, and then when Jesus goes, he doesn't go with signs and wonders. What does Jesus go into the temple with? Teaching. And Jesus says, as he teaches, you must understand that I seek not the glory of men, but I seek the glory of God. That Jesus corrects these misguided expectations of Jesus. Misguided expectations of Christ always grow out of unbelief. Always grow out of an unwillingness to listen to what Jesus has said. We live in a world that has a million misguided expectations of who Jesus is and of what he should do. They all are always asking and speculating about what Jesus would say or what Jesus would do, what they would expect from Jesus. We wear bracelets that say, what would Jesus do? That's a fine question to ask, but it doesn't make any sense unless we first ask, well, what did Jesus do? What did Jesus say? And the world often looks at Jesus, and in their sin, they reject him because they say things like, well, if God is a good God, God would want me to be happy. In their suffering, they reject Christ because they say, if God were good and if God were sovereign over all things, wouldn't God want to keep me from sorrow? Wouldn't God want to keep me from suffering? If he really cared about me, wouldn't he do those things? That just in life in general, they say, well, wouldn't God want to give me my own freedom, let me be the captain of my own domain? Why would God want to curtail my freedom and put me in a box and tell me how to live? Wouldn't a good God let me live my life however I want? They have these expectations that they have placed on Jesus. And they have all of these reasons in their mind for their rejection of Christ, but ultimately what they have are rejections in search of reasons. Pride and self-glory and unbelief at the base. We have to deal with Jesus as Jesus has revealed himself in the Word. Our misguided expectations, these things that we want of Jesus that Jesus never promises, grow out of unbelief. Jesus refusing to live up to our false standards and our false expectations that we have put on him is not a reason for unbelief, but I think John would say it is a symptom of it. They don't understand who Jesus is. They don't understand what to expect from him because they do not believe. It is a symptom of unbelief. What is the second one? It is strategic confusion. We see first with his brothers. They have these misguided expectations. They want things from Jesus that Jesus hasn't promised. If you read the rest of the text, it is almost comical, if it weren't sad, how much confusion there is about Jesus. That there is confusion, and nearly every time Jesus speaks, the confusion gets worse. His brothers are confused about who he is. The crowds are confused. Some say that he's a good man. Others say, well, we think he's leading people astray. They're confused when Jesus begins to teach. They say, well, how can this man, he doesn't know anything. He's never studied. He's never learned. How can he speak with such authority and such learning? They're confused. They say, well, could this be the Christ? Well, and if he is the Christ, are the Pharisees saying he's the Christ? They're confused. This man says somebody's trying to kill him. Does he have a demon? They're confused. But he says he's going somewhere and we're not going to be able to find him. Where is he going? Is he going to among the Greeks? He says that where he goes, we can't come. What does he mean by all of these things? There is just absolute, utter confusion. When they come to Jesus, they are grasping at straws, confused in nearly every way. They are lost. And every time Jesus tries to answer them, tries to bring clarification, it seems that they get more and more confused. Why is it that they are confused at the words of Jesus? They are confused because they want to be. Jesus has said time and time again, you don't hear me, and you don't understand me, and you don't listen to me because you don't believe. That their confusion over the teaching of Jesus is chosen. It is strategic. It is, we might even say, convenient for them. Listen to what he says in verse 17. As they marvel at his teaching, he says to them, if anyone's will is to do God's will, he will know whether the teaching is from God or whether I am speaking on my own authority. That's another way, in Chris's paraphrase, to say, if you would believe me, you wouldn't be so confused. If you wanted to listen, if it was your will to do the will of God, if you wanted to believe God, if you wanted to hear, if you wanted to understand, you would hear me and you would understand and you would believe. Even at the end of the passage, did you notice, Nicodemus admits we have judged Jesus without ever really hearing him. He says to the Pharisees, is it our way to judge a man without first hearing him and seeing what he does? He admits to them, we have not really considered the works of Jesus and the words of Jesus and what he claims for himself. And they make fun of Nicodemus. Oh, are you from Galilee too? Or are you going to follow him too? They are confused about the teaching of Jesus, not because Jesus is not clear. Jesus has been clear throughout the gospel. They're confused because they do not believe. The root cause is unbelief. Their confusion is a strategic confusion. It is convenient for them. Often, when I hear skeptics talk about Jesus, they'll say things like, well, we can never really know what Jesus said. I mean, who can know the real words of Jesus? Who can know the real works of Jesus? I mean, the Bible can't be trusted. The Bible is largely myth, that maybe there might be a kernel of truth at the bottom of it. But even if a man did live by the name of Jesus who lived in the first century, there's no way that he said and did these things. Who can really know what Jesus said? There is just all of this confusion about the person and the work of Christ. That grows out of not evidence. That grows out of unbelief. That is strategic confusion. That is intentional, convenient confusion. I remember once I had a friend who claimed to follow Jesus and moved eventually to a large city, to a large urban area, where the teaching of Jesus were considerably uncool. And miraculously, within a couple years, he began to say of the Bible things that he used to believe, things that are clearly taught in Scriptures, things that Christians have believed for 2,000 years. He began to say things like, well, the Bible's not as clear on that as I used to think it was. Oh, these are complex issues that we need to wrestle with, but they're really unclear, and it's hard to know for sure what Jesus meant about these things. It's hard to know what the Bible teaches about gender or sexuality or salvation or even the resurrection. It's hard to know about these things. These things are complex. His confusion grew not out of evidence, not out of experience, not out of argumentation. His confusion comes out of unbelief. He chooses to be confused because he does not want to believe Jesus. Remember once somebody came to me and said, we're asking advice on how do I talk to a family member. They said, I have this family member that has come to me that claims to be a Christian and is saying to me, I'm beginning to doubt the resurrection. I'm beginning to doubt whether the evidence is there for the physical, bodily resurrection of Jesus. And I'm wrestling through these things, and I'm trying to figure out whether I can remain a Christian, whether I can really believe that Jesus was physically, bodily raised from the dead. And I remember I asked them, you need to figure out what else is happening in their life. That almost assuredly what is happening with them is not truly a crisis about the resurrection, that they have not examined the evidence and found new evidence that would lead them to rationally and reasonably doubt the physical bodily resurrection of Jesus. Almost certainly there is something else happening in their life for which the resurrection is an inconvenient truth. There's something they want. There's something that they want to do. There is some path they want to go down that the gospel is a stubborn obstacle that they must first remove. And sure enough, miraculously, they decided they didn't believe the resurrection was true anymore. And in the coming months, they walked away from their family, walked away from their marriage, and walked away into sin. It was never about the resurrection. It was about unbelief. That we have in our world what we could call strategic confusion. The world is often confused about Jesus, not because they lack knowledge, but because they want to be confused. It is easier to say of the things of Jesus, who can really know? Who can know what Jesus would want from us? And then I get to live however I want. John says that's unbelief. That grows out of not argumentation and evidence, but it grows out of a heart that does not want to believe Jesus. This does not mean that everything that Jesus says is super easy to understand. The disciples themselves are confused about Jesus. But I hope that you've seen, even as we walked this far in John's gospel, that Jesus is not attempting to hide who he is. That in fact, there's a part of me, as I've preached now through 7 chapters of John's gospel, that fears that every sermon sounds the same for you, because every sermon is Jesus saying, I am the Son of God, I am the Messiah. If you will come to me and believe me and look at me, you will have life and you will live forever. Jesus is saying the same thing in every single passage. If you will trust me, if you'll come to me, I'll give you life. I am the Lamb that takes away the sins of the world. I am the light of the world. I am the one who gives my body and my blood for you. If you will come to me in faith, you will be saved. He stands up and says, if anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. And do you notice John, in this one little verse, drops in, and many people believed in him. There are those there that heard and saw and believed. That often our confusion over the teaching of Jesus is not true confusion. It's strategic. It is convenient. It grows out of unbelief. Number 3, what is the symptom then of this unbelief? It sometimes looks like misguided expectations of Jesus. It sometimes looks like feigning confusion over the teaching of Jesus. Number 3, it often produces in us self-righteousness. The Pharisees are self-righteous in their rejection of Jesus. Not only do they reject Jesus, but they see themselves as the righteous, the law-keeping people of God, and they place themselves over Jesus. They are, in their mind, judges over Christ. Do you notice even when they reject Jesus, they send these guards to arrest him, and the guards come back and they refuse to arrest Jesus. They're terrified of him, and no one's ever spoken like this. No one wants to lay a hand on him. And the response to the guards is this: who cares what the crowds think? They're all accursed. They don't know what they're talking about. They say to the guards, have you seen any of us trust him? We're the authority. We're the righteous, law-abiding people of God. We're the ones that are the arbiter of truth. Have you seen us trust Jesus? He is accursed. He's not the Christ. If he were the Christ, we would trust him. They have placed themselves as judge over Jesus. They are the ones who keep the law, and they accuse Jesus of breaking the law. But you notice Jesus shows them that they actually are hypocrites. That despite their insistence that they care about the law, Jesus says, you don't care about the law at all. They're mad. Jesus brings up the main thing they're mad about is the passage we looked at earlier in John's Gospel. Do you remember when Jesus heals the man, the invalid at the pool of Bethsaida, 38 years, couldn't walk, Jesus heals him. Why are they mad that Jesus healed the man? It's because he did it on the Sabbath. And he tells the man to get up and to take his mat and to go. And the man carries his mat on the Sabbath. And so thus they say Jesus has broken the Sabbath by healing this man and by telling him to carry his mat. Jesus says to them, you care so much about the law. You think yourselves to be law keepers. If you're law keepers, why are you trying to kill me? You care about the law. You care about doing what you think is righteous. But you as law keepers are willing to murder me? You care about the law, but you want to kill me? And then he brings another example. He says, if a Jewish boy, the 8th day of his life falls on the Sabbath, they wouldn't wait until the 9th day to circumcise him. They would circumcise him, as was their custom, as was the law required, on the 8th day, Sabbath or no Sabbath. He says, if you can do that sort of work on the Sabbath and not break the law, you can do that, and I can't heal somebody's body? That makes you angry? That he points out their hypocrisy, that they claim to be those who are righteous, but they actually don't care about the law, but they are self-righteous. They have placed themselves as judges over Christ. Self-righteousness, that is this feeling of being justified in and of ourselves, being justified by our own works and by our own deeds, is always rooted in unbelief. Many people in our world still sit in judgment of God. You ever heard somebody say, well, you know, I could never worship a God who, if the God of the Bible, if that's God, I could never worship a God who demands that of people. I could never worship a God that would have a hell, that would send people away from him for eternity. Well, I could never worship a God that would demand that people trust him, that would be so exclusive in his claims. I could never worship a God like that. What is that? That is self-righteously placing ourselves as the standard and the judge over God. Our world is desperate to feel virtuous and to feel justified and to prove their righteousness, because if they can convince themselves that they are virtuous, if they can convince themselves that they are righteous, if they can convince themselves that they are justified, thus they will convince their hearts they do not need a Savior and there is no judgment coming. It's been happening since the garden. Adam and Eve, in pride, walk into sin. And Adam and Eve eat of the fruit, and sin comes into the world. And when God comes to Adam and Eve, what do? They hide from God. They want to find a way to shield themselves from the judgment that is to come. Men and women have been doing the same thing ever since the garden. That it is a self-righteousness that seeks to shield us from Christ. It is a self-righteousness that is rooted in unbelief. John shows us just how void this is, just how vain this self-righteousness is, that it is nothing compared to Jesus. Jesus is the one who is truly righteous. He's the one who is the actual law keeper. He is the one who really does seek the glory of the Father. This is why Jesus can say to them, where I go, that is, I'm going to go back to the Father. I'm going to be crucified, dead and buried, raised, and I'm going to ascend back to God. He says to them, where I go, you can't go. And when I go, you will look for me, but you will not find me. Our attempts at self-righteousness are always veiled expressions of unbelief. So we have to ask ourselves, do I feel righteous in and of myself? And is my self-righteousness merely a means to escape the reality of my own pressing need of Jesus? Self-righteousness is a symptom of unbelief. And lastly, the fourth one. What is this last symptom? It is open hostility. I want you to see all four of these are very different, but all four of them have the same root. We often think of this one as the real picture of rejection, of the real picture of unbelief. But John has showed us that unbelief looks like all of these. It looks like these false expectations of Jesus. It looks like this confusion over the teaching of Jesus. It can be self-righteousness, and it can be open hostility, open hatred of Jesus. There is a turning point in John's gospel in which the heat is going to continue to rise throughout the gospel, leading to the crucifixion, where the Jews now not only reject the teaching of Jesus, but the Jews openly seek his arrest and his execution. He says he cannot go to Judea. He doesn't want to go because the Jews are seeking to kill him. They've not just rejected what he said about himself, but they now have decided that what Jesus has said is worthy of his own death. There is a growing hostility in John's gospel, not just rejection, but hostility and hatred. Why do they hate Jesus? Is it because they have heard the teaching of Jesus? Is it because they have considered the words of Jesus? Is it because they have weighed all the evidence and searched the scriptures to see if they truly do point to Jesus? Is it because they have seen all and experienced all that Jesus has done before him? Have they looked at all of this evidence and found it wanting and therefore rejected Jesus? Jesus says no. Jesus says to his brothers, they hate me. Why? Because they are in the darkness. And as the light of the world, the light has come into the world, and I have exposed their deeds as evil. They reject Jesus not because they have found him wanting. They reject Jesus because they don't believe him. They don't want to come into the light. He says this way back in chapter 3. The light has come into the world, and men loved darkness. There is an unbelief here that causes them to lead in their response to Jesus with open hostility and rejection and hatred. They hate Jesus because he exposes their deeds to the light. This is the same thing that is true in our world. Open hostility to Christ is rooted first, not in people considering truly the evidence for Jesus and coming away unconvinced. Open hostility and hatred of Christ is rooted in an unwillingness to believe Jesus. It is rooted in loving the darkness rather than loving the light. We live in a world that rages against Christ. It has been said by lots of people that the atheist mantra is, there is no God, and I hate him. There is an irony in that we live in a world that does not believe God exists, but seems to be so angry at him. Why does the world rage against Christ? Why does the world hate the things of God? It is not because they have come to truly examine the words of Jesus and the works of Jesus and the nature of Christ. It is because the light has come into the world and the world loves darkness. It is rooted first in unbelief, not in moral superiority, not in argumentation, not in evidence, but in unbelief. They hate Christ because they don't believe him. They don't want to. Unbelief will ultimately lead to open hostility toward Jesus and towards his people. We shouldn't be surprised, Jesus says, when the world hates the people of God that have stepped into the light. He says, they hated me, just you should expect that they will hate you. I was reminded this week by Dr. York in one of our staff devotionals that we ought to give up the idea that we're ever going to be cool to the world. We're just going to die to the notion that the world is ever going to think that followers of Jesus are cool and acceptable. So the world hated Jesus, so the world will hate us if we step into the light. What John shows us is this incredible variety of unbelief. Looks like these misguided expectations. It can look like this confusion over Jesus. It can look like self-righteousness. It can even look like open hatred and hostility to Jesus. So the question then has to be, what are we supposed to do with this unbelief? If it can take a million different forms, what is the solution? If unbelief is the world's deepest sickness, what then is the only cure? If all of these symptoms have the same root, if they all come from the same thing, then there must be one remedy. There must be one thing that deals with unbelief. It's not, as we've said, what we often look to. It is not first and primarily argumentation. It's not even first and primarily evidence. It's not, the solution is not political, it's not financial, it's not leadership, it's not legal, it's not military, it's not emotional. The solution to this must be something deeper than any of those things, because we don't have reasons that lead to unbelief. We have unbelief that lead to reasons. We have to get at the root cause. What is it that is the only solution to unbelief? To all of those that are lost in the desert of unbelief, what do they need most? Here's what I want you to see what Jesus does. Where are they? They're in Jerusalem. Why? They are at the festival of booths of tabernacle. They are being reminded of when God saved them in the Exodus, when God brought them out of Egypt and brought them into the wilderness, and they are specifically remembering and rehearsing and celebrating the way that God kept them alive in the desert. What did they have to have in the desert in order to live? They had to have water. They needed food, but you can survive without food longer than you can survive without water. And at the Feast of the Tabernacles, they are specifically remembering, they are saying to God as they celebrate, God, we remember and we rejoice. We were slaves in Egypt, and you brought us out of slavery, and you brought us to the desert, and God, you didn't leave us to die in the desert. We were in the desert, and we were thirsty, and we were surely to die there, but you provided for us. Moses stood before the rock in Exodus chapter 17, and as he listened to God, he struck the rock, and out of the rock, after the striking of the rock, comes water. God provides water for the thirsty in the wilderness that they would live. And Jesus, at this feast, on the last day, on the great day, on the day in which they would ceremonially pour out water to be reminded of the water that God had provided for them and kept them alive in the wilderness. Jesus stands before a desert of unbelief. And what does he say? He cries out, verse 37, "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink." What is the ultimate solution? What is the ultimate cure for those who are lost in the darkness of unbelief? It is to know Christ by faith. Jesus invites them in. If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. If they will see their own desperation, if they will be humbled before him, if anyone thirsts, if you understand your need and your desperation of me, Jesus says, come and drink. Come in faith. It is the simple call that Jesus has extended in every chapter of John's gospel. Come to me and come in faith. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to understand everything. You don't have to have it all figured out. But if you will come to me, what do you get? Jesus offers not just water. Jesus offers himself. If anyone is thirsty, come to me and drink. That it's his life, that it's his death, that it's his resurrection who will bring life to them. Jesus offers himself. And when Jesus offers himself, his grace comes to us. This is the cure of unbelief, is to come to Jesus, to know him by faith, that we might know his grace, that we might never be thirsty again. Not just that, but that we might have this greater gift, not that we would just have water from Christ, but Jesus says to them, if anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink, and whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. There is a deep, beautiful truth here in which Jesus says, if you'll come to me, not only will I save you, but I will put my very spirit in you. You'll never be thirsty again because the Spirit of God will live in you. Out of your very heart will flow rivers of living water. Just like there flowed rivers from the rock in the desert, so your heart now will have rivers of flowing water, the very Spirit of God in you. This is the hope. This is the only hope for all the world. There is no other hope for men who are thirsty and lost in unbelief. That's why we will continue to preach and to extend the call of Jesus. If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. I would encourage you, check your own heart. Consider the symptoms in your own life. What symptoms do you see? Do you see misguided expectations that you've put on Jesus? False confusion you have about the words of Jesus that are convenient for you? Maybe it's that you feel righteous and you feel justified in your own works that keep you shielded from the need of Christ. Maybe you're here and you have open hostility and hatred towards the things of God. Do you see the symptoms of unbelief in your heart? Hear the invitation of Christ. If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. What is our only hope? It is to come to Christ and drink.